I've removed the locations for everyone's safety. I wouldn't encourage anyone to find out where this happened, and even if you do consider this a word of warning. However, if you want to visit the Tower of Babel yourself, I won't stop you. I can go to sleep knowing my conscience is clear. My family has always described me as a restless girl. I was always playing, running around until I crashed out and passed out sprawled on the dirt like a dandelion. As I grew, this turned into wandering after I got out of school, around the neighborhood and hell, even wandering the internet. You'd be surprised at the amount of people I know that, like myself, grew up with unrestricted access to the internet. I found all sorts of urban legends, from cryptids to mysterious radio stations you could only find in the most forgotten by God places. But it never satiated my wanderlust. So when I felt ready, I turned to urban exploration. I've made a few friends here and there that also share this hobby, and perhaps my level of wanderlust. One summer day, we found this particular place in the outskirts of my hometown. It was an old industrial district, metalworkers, mass production of what I think were guns and other weaponry. I didn't do my research before going, accounting that one of my other friends would in my stead. Unluckily for me, none of my friends' schedules aligned with my own, so I decided to go all on my lonesome. Maybe for some recon at the very least, and so I could find all the little fun spots to scare my friends half to death when or if we decided to go there together. Parked my car on the outskirts of the district. A rusted metal chain link fence is waiting for me. The door was half disintegrated from the age, thrown to the side. A utility pole off in the corner, with a mess of cables that connected two unknown points together. I remember that day was a little misty. I had decided to go during the early morning on one very humid day, and this was my price to pay, being stuck on a shitty copy of Silent Hill. With my bag over my shoulder, I stepped past the entrance. I didn't worry about my car given there was nobody there. Thank God. I must have spent 5 minutes walking on cracked, overgrown cement. The air wasn't too cold, but it still stung me a little as I breathed it in. The scent of metal lingered underneath. I figured, at the time, that the source was probably all the rusted metal around. The thick mess of cables was my main source of direction. My steps echoed in the barren land, and I had begun to see rusted metal signs here, a few abandoned cars there, and something porous and yellow sticking up from the ground at one point. Then I made it to the first of many weird things there, what I'd end up calling the Tower of Babel. I know the name is misleading, given that before me stood a tall managerial building of horrible, hungry, brutalist architecture, overgrown, molding, with cracked glass windows. It was the epitome of the capitalist idea of useful, not pretty, with its soulless gray walls and its exact corners that all made it feel so dead, so forgotten. The cables connected to the building in yet another bramble-like knot off to the side. I stepped past the glass windows that creaked as I pushed them open. I thought for a moment it would snap off its hinges. The sound it made was too shrill, almost like a wind chime announcing my arrival. It echoed through the entrance hall, with puddles of oily water, lush mushrooms that seemed to almost pulse as if they had a heart and veins pumping, the derelict elevator at the end of the hall, and an old receptionist desk. Behind it stood a pillar of the many that held the ceiling above. I saw a shadow sprawled on it, black as night. My heart leapt from my chest at that moment, and I called out, "Hello?" The echo was somehow more deafening than the silence that followed. I approached slowly, trying to find the source of the shadow. I saw no one, nothing that could have caused it. But I did notice something. The silhouette was a bit blurry up close, almost as if it was made of soot or charcoal. I touched it and was deathly cold and yet too hot when I pulled my hand away. My moment of stupor and confusion was cut short as I caught the sound of light flickering, and I turned to the source, the elevator. The door was halfway open. The interior was lost to my eyes between the seconds of light and void darkness that filled the very claustrophobic, half-falling apart interior of the lift, and I swear I could see a shadow when I blinked. Urban explorers have a certain flip-the-switch moment. The moment where you feel like you're not welcome there anymore. I felt like everything in that building was pouncing to get me. The hungry ivy growing on the ceiling, the mushrooms calling for more sustenance, the shadows that wanted yet another companion. So I bolted out of there, slamming the glass door so hard it actually snapped off the rusty hinges and shattered as I bolted past it. I ran well outside of the place and had to bow down to catch my labored breath. I said I was an urban explorer, but I never said I was a brave one. When I turned around to see the hellish place, to see if anything was coming towards me from it, the place was just normal. Sure, one of the glass doors was smashed beyond repair, but the shadow was still there, and the light didn't flicker anymore. This is how most horror stories begin, I know. But I didn't want to cut it short when there was still so much to see. I convinced myself somehow that probably the rest of the place wouldn't be as bad. This place was probably old as hell. There was probably something in the air. For a few seconds, I even convinced myself it might have been a gas leak somewhere in there. So I took that moment of denial in stride and walked around and past the managerial office and tried to ignore the lit-up windows on the top floor. More walking led me to the factory area. This seemed older, much more industrial revolution, with those blackened chimneys, the red bricks, and the gravel trails that connected one building to the other. I saw glints of old abandoned machinery. I saw soot that leaked into more freaky humanoid shapes, which made me walk a little faster every time I saw them. In the air, I could still feel the leftover smell of burning charcoal. My steps echoed more here, because I swore I could hear extra footsteps, and maybe even the murmur of conversation like workers were coming and going from place to place. Black powder blew from the chimneys, the remains of what once was a working industry being pushed away by the wind and the collective memory that had abandoned them so long ago. If I wasn't so on edge then, I would have found it peaceful. There was a beauty to this place that I can only appreciate now in hindsight. Rows and rows of old production lines, assembly lines, all housed in these old buildings with metal roofs that probably boxed the heat like an oven during hotter days of summer. It made me a little sad, though, that this place was made for creating instruments of violence, tools for useless wars that only caused pollution and avoidable deaths. The air picked up as I thought all that. The buildings breathed it in, and with it, my growing dread. This place was beautiful, liminal, and scary. To be the only human in a place that would be expected to be packed full, even knowing it was abandoned, it's a sensation that's hard to shake off. I tried to distract myself by wondering what lives would these workers live. Maybe imagining my surroundings full of people would make it less threatening. At first, I thought of dedicated factory workers that got their salary by the sweat of their brow and their hard work. But as a brown rat skittered past me, scaring the soul out of me for a moment, I finally realized that probably these workers had it rough. Illness spreading, being worked thin by greedy bosses, unions non-existent, and a hanging sense of death and inevitability. Like this place was destined to be forgotten, destined to be a place of only fear and sour memory. The thought left an acid feeling in my mouth, mixed with the scent of metal, as I reached a section that seemed to be of only warehouses. Of course, they must have kept all their raw materials somewhere. I didn't go into the buildings, expecting a heavy dose of tetanus and infections waiting for me inside. Dirt packed into the walls, forming tall and contorted figures with limbs. A badly placed bulb in a corner made me think I saw someone curled up, napping. If I recall correctly, I swore I almost saw its chest rising as if it was breathing. Instinctively, I moved slower, quieter. Already something in me was telling me I'm rather better off without being seen or heard, even if, supposedly, there was no one there. After my little solid snake moment there, I reached a huge warehouse. Walls crumbling, support beams crashed and rusted, a huge hole in the tin roof above, and cracked glass. There was a metal sign, rusted and with yellow and black paint. I couldn't discern what it said, but I figured it had nothing good on it anyway. I kept walking and walking. hearing the rumbling of something heavy in the distance. Maybe something in this awful place finally fell down and rid me of its existence. 5 minutes later, I saw the sign again. Maybe I got turned around, I thought, and tried to follow another path. It had become a conscious effort to avoid the same buildings after a while. I wasn't sure if my subconscious fear was clouding my mind, or if this labyrinthine mess was actually moving, which would have been a crazy idea, at least at the time. But thankfully I managed to make it to the end of the warehouse section. By then it was midday. I sat down somewhere in the shade and went to eat my packed lunch in my bag. Half of my water bottle was gone, and it was quite warm when I touched it. My food wasn't looking right, but it was the only source of energy I had. So I bit the bullet and chipped off what looked funky. At this point, you might be wondering what in God's green earth kept me here. What was so important, so interesting about this probably cursed place? I wouldn't know what to tell you. It just was, and I kept going. Before me now stood a long field of dead grass, yellowed and burnt by the sun. On each side I saw tall utility poles with more thick messes of cables that swayed slowly in the mild breeze. Here there was more junk, metal scraps, a few tires, old clothes. All across the horizon was rotten green and bright blue skies. Nowhere to take shelter from the sun, no shade, and no shadows. Here it felt more empty than before, with only junk and contamination all around me. It had begun to feel boring. What was this anyway? A trash dumping site? Something that got completely filed down by the elements? This place only made me think of what would be left of humanity when we're all gone. All our trash, all our poison to the earth with our heavy metals and our chemical weapons, all of our unused things, all that plastic that would pollute the ground for years, and nothing would stop it until it decided to give up the ghost. But like Alice, I still chased the rabbit down the hole. The cables and utility poles kept going and going, more and more wires appearing every few steps. In a moment of mental clarity, I debated whether to turn around and simply leave or not. Maybe there was really nothing left. Maybe there was a final pole at the end, fallen and arching with deathly electricity and nothing else waiting for me. The scent of battery acid, the smell of ozone filled my nostrils then. I turned to my left and stopped abruptly to take it in. The image of what was a few miles away from me was so clear and yet so confusing, with its large plumes of white smoke, crumbling walls, the whirring of turbines and the bubbling of water echoing off the tall cylinders of cement. A nuclear power plant. I couldn't help the loud, "What the fuck?" that left me. It seemed to carry into the wind and feed the amusement of the universe that put me in this situation. Out of sheer self-preservation, I didn't step closer. I merely watched. I saw the thick wires lead into it, giving this whole hellish place, and especially the tower, all its energy. I could see the gates opened, the doors torn off, the discarded equipment thrown about as if it was a breadcrumbs enticing me to go in. This thing wasn't human-made, no matter how hard it tried. Another flip-the-switch moment happened for me then, and I ran further down the hall of utility poles that finally ended, connected to giant dish antennas and a final radio antenna at the very end. Behind it, a rusted chain-link fence, and past it in the horizon, what I think is a beautiful field of sunflowers. The air whistled its mournful tune, the derelict antennas creaking as if it were bound to fall on me any second. If the crushing didn't kill me, the tetanus sure would. I'd rather go out in one swift go, thank you. I was too caught in the skyline, the sheer nonsense of it all. I tripped over something and caught myself before I fell and ate shit. Looking over my shoulder, I see more of that rod of porous material, yellowed and old, bone, a shin, connected to a thigh bone, a half-buried hip and ribs, and a poking skull that's overgrown with dried moss. My eyes widen, and I turn back to the radio tower as it begins to shake. The light begins to pulse. I shouldn't be here, I think finally, in a true moment of clarity.
Nobody should be here.
The weak voice of something behind me made me jump and turn around again. A figure, clad in black, their face partially obscured by a hood, gaunt and with flesh that was yellowed and stretched like old leather. I could see their torso wrapped in a red cloth. Between their emaciated collarbones sat a necklace of ancient gold. It was dainty and barely caught my eye. They had a waist too thin and ribs pushing against their flesh, bony hips that struggled to keep on a weathered and dirty purple skirt. In the shadow of the hood that hid a mess of brown hair, I could see bright green eyes staring at me with what I thought was worry. Their gaze flickers upwards to the light that beats at the very top of the tower behind me, and then back at me as their lips pursed. I'm just leaving," I said with my voice weak and my throat dry. My tongue felt heavy, a sour taste from the lack of saliva and maybe something else. "I'm sorry for trespassing, I was just curious." The figure didn't answer. The worry turned to disappointment. "My name's Alicia. What's your name?"
Mystery.
They smirked with a voice dry and thin, wavering between female and male. The figure was quite amused at my fear, but then the air swelled and that smugness turned to utter panic. It tries to run at me with their arms out to grab me, as the antennas all turn to me. A metallic, distorted voice fills the air. It fills my ears. Its cadence replaces my heartbeat. I can't understand what it's saying, and I taste again that sour candy, that battery acid, lead and arsenic coating my tongue like slime and oil mixed with dirt. Swallowing only makes it worse. In my despair, I ran away from them, and up the chain link fence with an agility I haven't had since childhood. I run to where God can't help me now. I run through the field of once dry dead grass that now lays blackened like it had been baked to nothing by intense heat. The black dirt, both gunpowder and soot, and humid like it was a shameful attempt at covering an oil spill, sticks to my shoes and cakes my ankles. I make it to the brush. I make it to the sunflowers, but still I run to hide away from that god-awful noise, like I was standing right beside a loudspeaker with a microphone right beside it. It shatters my eardrums. It's so loud it should have left me deaf for life, if not outright kill me on the spot. My breath is still labored, but I lower my speed when I think I'm far enough. Beaten, and with zero mental strength to convince myself, I walk and hold a carrot of possibility where maybe there's an exit to the very end of this field. At least the flowers are nice, they smell fresh, and they look well taken care of. I try not to step over the stems. I almost trip a few times, especially as there's more and more of them. At one point, I only see yellow and brown and have to push through the flowers in each step I take. I can barely see the sky that's starting to tinge a yellowish dusk. The taste hasn't left my mouth yet. When I think I finally find the flowers thinning out, I start to notice how they curl into themselves, how their bright yellow is turned a sickly gray, how the brown centers fester with mold and decay, and flies agonize on it. Then the noise returns. The crunching of gravel, the whirring of inert machinery, the heavy scrapes of metal, the static of an empty radio station, the whistling above like something heavy is cutting the air. The black dirt is now merely disintegrated black tar of once living matter. The sound it makes is gut-wrenching as I'm fighting through inky quicksand. I prayed to God there were no craters or dips in the terrain because in my state I couldn't discern depth. But as I had stated, I was now somewhere where God couldn't help me. I slid and skidded down a huge crater, the epicenter. Black goop covered me, and I ate shit face first. A sticky warmth comes over me. Maybe finally I've sweat out every mineral in my body. Maybe finally I found a place where the sun shines on me, and it's merely humid sunlight on my skin. I look up to a giant mass of pale, sickly yellow, shinning, arching with energy. I barely have time to register it before it erupts in light, and I do cover my eyes out of instinct, but I can see through my eyelids and skin. I can see my hands' bones. I feel a surge of warmth. I see a giant mushroom cloud elevating to the sky. I see a hand reach for God in the heavens. I hear it speak. "Come, let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly. Come, let us build ourselves a city with a tower that reaches for the heavens, so we may make a name for ourselves." The Lord scattered them from there all over the earth, their hubris, their brick and mortar. And since they couldn't reach heaven, they made their cities, Babylon, Jericho, Jerusalem. And when that wasn't enough, they made hell on earth, building ships to carry oil that would kill the water, mess with the very energy of the universe to eradicate each other, and burn their victims to shadows. They made guns and grenades for senseless war, the banality of their violence as endless as their curiosity. I saw all the wars that passed and all that there's yet to come. I saw people die. I saw them turn to dust for the chance of one powerful person reaching to touch God. When they leave this world behind, when all the cities are toppled like the Tower of Babel, none will remain. Extinction, pure and simple, pure and beautiful. The world would end with nothing to our name, nothing to remind us but our shame and our atrocities. The lying, the spilling of blood, Abel and Cain, over and over again. Something grabs my bicep, yanking me away from the very core of this unholy light. I didn't need to open my eyes to see who was carrying me. All I could see was bright green orbs looking back at me, and a bony hand burning my flesh as they dragged me with meager strength. I said then, stupor filling my mind and that thing filling my soul. I spoke with its voice, and it spoke with mine. Finally, I knew who this person was. So he carried me away in the spirit into the wilderness, and I saw a woman sitting upon a scarlet-colored beast, full of names of blasphemy, and having 7 heads and 10 horns. The woman was arrayed in purple and scarlet, and bedecked with precious stones and pearls, having a golden cup in her hand full of abominations and filthiness of her fornication. And upon her forehead was a name written, Mystery, Babylon the Great, Mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. I remember nothing else but my body being dragged into cold cement, and my bleary eyes that looked up to the figure that struggled to carry me, even with the help of inky black shadows. I was left by my car, and with a 3rd-degree burn on my arm, I drove away and never looked back. There was no way of convincing myself this wasn't real, especially as the radio jolted and turned itself on. There in the night of the road, I could see the display read, April 14th, 24. Aside from it coming to life on its own, I tried to use the radio to calm myself. I heard the music fill my ears. Finally, some sense of normalcy. And then, the radio show host spoke. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mystery, the Whore of Babylon, reporting to you live from the Tower of Babel. I don't go urban exploring anymore.